You have probably never thought about how many parts of your day pass through a single company without you noticing your phone, your television, the elevator in your apartment building, the insurance policy in a drawer somewhere, the hospital where you were born, if you happen to be born in a certain country. All of it. One name. In South Korea, that name is Samsung. And the honest answer to why is stranger and more uncomfortable than most people expect. Samsung did not start as a technology company. It started in 1938 as a small trading company selling dried fish, vegetables, and noodles, exporting them out of a provincial city to markets in China. For its first few decades, it had nothing to do with electronics at all. So how does a noodle trading company end up manufacturing roughly 1 in every 5 smartphones sold on the planet, and along the way, become so large that some economists half-jokingly call South Korea the Republic of Samsung? The answer starts with a government decision most countries never made. In the 1960s and 1970s, under President Park Chung-hee, South Korea's government picked a small number of companies and backed them heavily with cheap loans, tax breaks, and protection from foreign competition in exchange for one condition: grow and eventually sell competitively to the rest of the world. Economist Alice Amsden, who studied this system closely, described it as discipline paired with support, not a free market experiment. Samsung was one of the companies chosen. This created something called a Chaebol, a Korean term for a family-controlled conglomerate that spans an enormous range of unrelated industries under one central ownership structure. Picture it less like a single company and more like an entire small economy, privately owned. Samsung today isn't just phones. It includes shipbuilding, construction, insurance, hospitals, an amusement park, a fashion label, and a chip-making division that is one of the largest semiconductor manufacturers in the world. Here's the number that puts the scale in perspective. At its peak, Samsung's various affiliated companies have accounted for an amount equivalent to roughly a fifth of South Korea's entire gross domestic product in a single year. Sociologist Jeffrey Kane, who has written extensively on Samsung's rise, has described the company's influence on Korean daily life as something closer to a state within a state than an ordinary corporation. Let's reconstruct what that actually looks like for an average Korean citizen. You might wake up in an apartment built by a Samsung construction subsidiary. You check your phone, made by Samsung Electronics. On your way to work, you pass a Samsung-branded department store. Your health insurance might be underwritten by a Samsung financial affiliate. If you're hospitalized, there's a real chance the hospital is Samsung affiliated too. None of this requires you to think about the brand consciously. It's simply the texture of the infrastructure around you, in the way that other countries' citizens might interact with dozens of unrelated companies to accomplish the same set of tasks. Now, here's the counterintuitive twist. This concentration of power was not an accident of good products alone. It was, in large part, a direct result of the same authoritarian-era industrial policy that historians credit for lifting the country out of poverty. The government needed a handful of massive, coordinated organizations capable of executing national-scale projects quickly. Small, independent competing firms would have been slower and harder to direct. So the government built giants on purpose, and those giants never really shrank back down once democracy arrived. This created a tension that Korean society still argues about today. On one hand, Samsung's success is a genuine point of national pride. Its chips, its screens, and its ships are used by billions of people who have never set foot in Korea. On the other hand, its size has raised uncomfortable questions about fairness. Smaller Korean businesses have historically struggled to compete for talent, financing, or even retail shelf space against a company this dominant. Political scientists studying South Korea have pointed to Chaebol dominance as one explanation for why the country's smaller firms lag so far behind its giants in productivity compared to economies with a more even distribution of large companies. There's also the matter of succession. Because Chaebols are typically controlled by a single founding family across generations, Samsung has weathered several high-profile legal controversies involving bribery, corporate control, and political influence, including cases that reached the country's own president. These moments briefly threatened the company's leadership, yet Samsung's core businesses continued largely uninterrupted through each one, a resilience that says as much about its structural entrenchment in the economy as about any individual leader. It helps to compare this to how most large economies actually work. In the United States, no single company touches housing, insurance, hospitals, retail, and consumer electronics all at once under one shared ownership umbrella. Antitrust law, built specifically to prevent this kind of horizontal concentration, would intervene long before a company reached anything close to this scope. South Korea's Chaebol system developed differently, in part because the government that built it wanted exactly this kind of cross-industry reach, betting that a handful of trusted, tightly coordinated organizations could execute national development goals faster than a fragmented marketplace of smaller competitors ever could. So picture the full arc: a dried fish trading stall in a provincial city, a stern government official demanding export competitiveness in exchange for financial support, a construction crew building apartment towers under a Samsung subsidiary logo, a chip fabrication plant, spotless and humming, producing memory chips destined for a laptop on the other side of the planet. Each scene, decades apart, belongs to the same unbroken institutional lineage. Today, Samsung Electronics alone is one of the largest technology companies on Earth by revenue, and the wider Samsung Group remains the largest of Korea's Chaebols by a significant margin. According to reporting from outlets like the Financial Times and Bloomberg, its scale has occasionally made it functionally impossible for the Korean government to let it fail, regardless of political party or economic cycle. When a company becomes that deeply woven into national output, national employment, and even national identity, too big to fail stops being a metaphor and starts being closer to a literal description. Here's the part that mirrors back onto you. It's tempting to look at Samsung's dominance and either admire it uncritically as a triumph of industrial strategy or dismiss it entirely as unfair monopoly power. The more honest picture holds both truths at once. Samsung's rise was deliberately engineered by a state that needed exactly this kind of concentrated force to compress a century of development into a few decades. That same concentration, once built, does not naturally dissolve just because the emergency that justified it has long since passed. Reform efforts have come and gone for decades, each promising to break up Chaebol power or increase transparency, and each running into the reality that these companies now employ, insure, house, and supply too much of the country to be dismantled without enormous disruption to ordinary lives. You started this wondering how one company came to touch nearly everything in a single country's daily life. Now you know it wasn't just brilliant products, and it wasn't only luck. It was a government's deliberate bet placed decades ago that a handful of giants could move faster than a marketplace of equals ever could, and a country still living, for better and for worse, inside the results of that bet.